Welcome back to the New Bridge Radio Show on WLTK-DB. Let's talk. I am your host, Kevin Mackey, and we are connecting you to what's next in your life. And we're here to remind you that you are important to this world, and we sure are glad to have you along on this episode of the New Bridge Radio Show. Remember, you can watch our show live now on our station page. Just head on over to www.WLTK-DB.com and you can catch us there. Also, you can catch us now live on YouTube or Facebook Live. And to do so, just head on over to either of those platforms and then the search bar, type in WLTK-DB, and you'll be able to view us on either Facebook Live or on our YouTube page. And we're excited about having those two technologies that StreamYard lets us have. If you would like to get in touch with the New Bridge Radio Show, you can email us at thenewbridgeradioshow@gmail.com. We love hearing from you. We love knowing what you like about the show. And if you must, we like knowing what you don't like about the show. We would also like to know if you would like to be our guest on the New Bridge Radio Show. We love connecting to people who have connected to what was next in their life. So drop us a line and let us know if you are such a person, because we would love to have you on the show and tell your story over the air. Tonight on the New Bridge Radio Show, our guest is a brilliant author and a patient advocate. Her and her husband were diagnosed with cancer within 72 hours of each other, and she has written a fantastic memoir about their experience called Stronger with Two. She is Bari Ross, and I'm pleased to have her, I think. Is she here, Todd? It doesn't look like we have her yet in the studio. And she might be just a little bit late, but we will give her a little bit of time and let her connect to the show. I think it'll be important because Bari Roberts is a patient advocate as well as a survivor of cancer. So while we're waiting for her to either let us know what's happened to her or her husband, I am a little bit worried that she isn't here because she has dealt with a lot of illness in her own personal life, and also as a patient advocate, she deals with illness. So while we're waiting, I'll tell you a little bit about her story. Her and her husband were in their middle-aged years, and they were both on their second marriage. Both of them had children from previous marriages, and they decided to leave the corporate world, and they moved to Phoenix, Arizona. Bari and her husband, and they had been married for about 6 years when they moved to Phoenix, Arizona, and they moved they moved there and they started a restaurant in Phoenix because there was no seafood and no great seafood restaurants in Phoenix. There was a lot of Mexican restaurants there that people could choose from. And so they decided they would open up a seafood restaurant that served crab cakes and other food that people were wanting to have, but couldn't necessarily get because they weren't near an ocean. But anyway, they opened up this restaurant and it was very successful. They were having a great success in the restaurant business. And they were this was in 2008. They were planning to take a cruise. And it was going to be a kind of an anniversary gift to themselves from themselves. And all of a sudden, Barry's husband, Charles, just started feeling exhausted and tired, and he could not keep his energy up, and he was very sick. So he ended up going to the doctor at Barry's insistence, and his doctor did some tests, and they started thinking, well, this might not be, this could be a form of leukemia that you have. And he was scheduled to go in for a biopsy. And while he was talking to his doctor, he looked at his doctor and he said, "You know what? I have noticed that my wife, Barry here, has a lump, a very hard lump, just below her right ear." And Charles' doctor said, "Oh, let's take a look." And so they took a look at the lump behind Barry's ear and decided that it was severe enough they probably should investigate it. So they took a look at it uh, and started to do some tests on Barry, and they discovered that she also had a rare cancer, a rare throat and neck cancer. And so they did a CT scan and they did X-rays and confirmed that she had a very rare form of neck and throat cancer. And I kind of wish she was here to tell this part of the story because this is interesting. She went into her doctor to get a diagnosis, and um, the doctor said, "Yep, we have confirmed you do have a positive diagnosis. You do have cancer." And the bad news is, the number one cancer doctor or oncologist in this area doesn't take your insurance. And Barry just sat there and listened to the man. And he's like, "So, I looked at the second best oncologist here in Phoenix, and the second best oncologist also doesn't take your insurance." And Barry is listening to this doctor and thinking, "Okay, well, you haven't addressed. I don't care about the insurance. That's not really what I'm worried about. What I'm worried about, and what I want you to answer, is what are we going to do about it? What are we going to do for Barry?" And the doctor said, "Well, I did look up another oncologist here in the Phoenix area, and I don't know anything about him. I don't know how well rated he is, but I figured I would at least give you a name." And Barry, I can understand her frustration, at that point, because I think we have all had this kind of frustrating experience dealing with the medical system as it is. It is very complex. And I know that I touched on it before in previous broadcasts of the New Bridge radio show. There are a lot of us that have healthcare insurance, and it can be pretty tricky finding what doctor to go to, what kind of tests you can take, what's covered, what's not covered, what you have to pay a copay on. It is very, very complicated. And as a nation, there's a lot we can do about it. There's a lot of hope in the fact that we can take a look at it and see, okay, this has worked and this hasn't worked, and then kind of go from there and build a healthcare structure that is a little simpler and a little easier to pay for and not as expensive. But anyway, I digress in this point, and it doesn't look like we have Barry yet. So this could be a one-man show about, and I don't want it to be all about healthcare. If you are listening or watching on YouTube or Facebook Live, and you want to ask questions about the book or just have a comment you'd like to make about your own healthcare, you can go ahead and do so in the chat. Just leave me your questions, and Todd will put them up here, and I'll be able to answer your questions, and we'll go from there. And I'll continue to talk about Barry's great book. And again, the author is Bari Ross, and Barry is spelled Bari. And she is a fantastic and brave and courageous woman who is married to an equally brave and courageous man. In the book, she says that the two of them have the fraternal twin cancers, born at the same time but vastly different. And they both had absolutely hellish experiences. Uh, but I think that Barry's was more so than Charles. But anyway, so she had gotten this news information from her doctor in Phoenix, kind of brushing her off in a way. And she looked at this doctor and she said, "Okay, you're not really doing anything for me, so I think we just need to be done. Go ahead and give me a copy of the CT scans, the blood work, and everything that you've done, and I'll take this and I will find the right course for me, and I will get this done. And thank you for the diagnosis." And she walked out of his office and she did what I think a lot of people would do in that situation. She reached out to her family. She called her daughter, Brooke, in Atlanta, and she said, "Brooke," and Brooke, her daughter, was already aware that Charles had been diagnosed with cancer just a few days earlier. And she was shocked to hear from her mother. She was asking, "Hey, how's Charles?" And her mother let her know, "It's not Charles that's the problem, it's me." She's like, "I just got a cancer diagnosis, and it nobody here really wanted to do anything. The doctor told me that he didn't accept my insurance, and neither did the other oncologists." And so her daughter worked for a university, Emory University at Winship. And so her daughter's like, "Okay, but fax me everything that you have as far as your scans, as far as your medical information, and I will take it from here. We will figure out a course of action." And her daughter was named Brooke. And so Barry went to a Staples, like we all have, with all of this medical information, her scans, her test results, and she faxed them to her daughter in Atlanta and waited for to hear back from her daughter. And what was interesting about Barry's cancer is she didn't feel any pain. uh, she was going through her day, running the restaurant, taking Charles to his doctor's appointments. She didn't feel, she didn't feel anything. Like she didn't even know she had a tumor until Charles mentioned it in front of his doctor. So she didn't feel anything. And what's more is gone to, she had gone to a physical, uh, and everything came out fine. So she wasn't expecting a cancer diagnosis. But anyway, it looks like we are just about ready to go to break, and maybe we'll hear from Barry in the meantime. But we'll go ahead and just step away and hear a quick, short word from our sponsors.
Sunday, October 24th, the 2021 Statler City Psychic Fair in Buffalo, New York. Come out and meet psychic medium and host of School Through Spirit, Diet Renee, and spirit medium and host of the Ghost Finders, Rob Thompson. Diet Renee is a renowned psychic medium, medical intuitive, and master teacher of psychic mediumship development. Hailing from Wisconsin, Diet trained under world-renowned psychic Lisa Williams. Spirit medium Rob Thompson is one of Diet's mediumship development students. He is the host and executive producer of America's longest-running indie paranormal TV show, The Ghost Finders, on Amazon Prime, Apple TV, and Roku. He has made guest appearances on other shows including Discovery Channel's Paranormal 911 and A Haunting, and teaches paranormal research at the Los Angeles City College. Come and meet these two superb mediums together on stage for live gallery readings. Remember, Sunday, October 24th, the 2021 Statler City Psychic Fair. Get your tickets now at StatlerCity.com. That's StatlerCity.com. Doors open at 1, close at 6. Gallery readings, tarot cards, and more. Statler City Psychic Fair. Tickets at StatlerCity.com.
Welcome back to the New Bridge Radio Show on WLTK-DB. Let's talk. I am your host, Kevin Mackey, and my guest, Bari Ross, hasn't made it yet. Maybe she will come soon. Come soon. I sent her a message. We'll see if she gets it in time. But we are talking about her book. So, uh, Bari Roberts Ross had an unusual experience in that she found out her husband, her new husband that she had been with just for 6 short years, had a rare form of leukemia. And after just being diagnosed, her husband pointed out to her doctor, his own doctor, that Barry had a lump on just right below her right ear. And they had tested it and found out that not only did she have cancer, but she had a rare form of cancer that was quite aggressive. And they gave her this devastating news that not only did they not accept her insurance, the number one oncologist in that area also didn't accept her insurance, and the second best oncologist in Phoenix also did not accept her insurance. And it in the book, it was one of the most frustrating points because it's like, why do we have to live with this? But anyway, so not being discouraged or bothered by it, Barry took things into her own hands and she took all of her tests and her scans and she went to a Staples there in Phoenix, a Staples office store, and she faxed all of her tests, everything that she needed her doctor to know, to her daughter at Emory University. And her daughter gave her a call and said, her daughter was in Atlanta. Her daughter gave her a call and said, "I've spoken to the doctor about your tests, about your scans, and about your results, and they have said that this is a very aggressive cancer, and they want you to fly to Atlanta now, tonight, so that they can begin treatment." And And her mother was like, "Well, there's no way I can do that because we have to do a biopsy on Charles," which was her husband, that next day. And one of the things as an advocate that Bari has mentioned on other podcasts is whenever you get a diagnosis of cancer or an illness that is life threatening, you should always ask for a second opinion, especially if you're given a diagnosis that could be terminal. At most, almost all insurance companies allow you to go to another doctor to get a second opinion. And she couldn't stress that enough in other podcasts as a patient advocate. She works very much with other patients and lets them know, well, your insurance will do this and your insurance will do that. And um, it really is needed when you're dealing with an illness like this. And Barry was very lucky to have a daughter who worked in the medical field and could give her some advice and act as a caregiver to her and her husband in this illness that she had. And she said something very profound in the book, and it struck me, and it might strike you as well. And if I haven't said the book again, the book is Stronger with Two by Bari Ross, Bari. She says, caregivers are as crucial to the patient as the doctors and the medicines. And this really turned out to be the case for Barry. She couldn't leave right away to go to Atlanta. She had to get her husband taken care of. And she didn't want to leave her husband, who had just been diagnosed with cancer, on his own. So she reached out to her husband's sister and said, Can you come to Phoenix? It's an emergency. And she told her everything that was happening to her brother, Charles. And she told her sister-in-law her own cancer diagnosis. And most people, never have to deal with something like this, having either their spouse or someone close to them sick with cancer at the same time. It's just such a rare thing. And when uh Bari would talk about the cancer, she would tell people, "Oh, I have a cancer diagnosis, and so does my husband." And a lot of professionals in the medical industry were like, "Yeah." But anyway, so the so Charles's sister decided to come to Phoenix to take care of him, so that Barry could go to Atlanta, be with her daughter, and go to a cancer hospital there in Atlanta to try to uh, see about treatment and finding a doctor and getting things put together. Oh, hang on just a minute. I got a message. This could be Barry. Uh, nope. Anyway, we'll continue this. So, so she arrives in Atlanta, and she ends up with one of a really stern, tough doctor that she called the captain. And he let her know, I tell you like it is. I don't sugarcoat anything. And he said, we've got to take a look at the tumor, and we've got to see how far we've progressed. We've got to see if this is what our treatment options are. And so Barry is in Atlanta with the captain, this captain of her recovery, of her treatment and her healing. And she um, uh, learns that her tumor is a stage 4B tumor, which means that not only is the tumor on her neck cancerous, but the cancer has also spread into her lymph nodes, into the rest of her body. And so it was a very dangerous situation for a cancer patient to be in. And not only that, she was also having to deal with her husband and make decisions with him. And here they both are in 2000, October of 2008, October and November, and just having the worst news that they could ever get. And it's beautifully told in the book, Stronger with Two. It's just an unbelievable time for the two of them. And Barry decides that she really needs to have Charles in Atlanta so that he can be taken care of, and they can work on his cancer, because they've decided that he has to have, and this was incredible. He had to have very, very aggressive treatment. Like, he had to have blood transfusions. He had to be in the hospital for treatment for 23 and a half weeks. So a long time for him. So they decided to get him to Atlanta, to Winship, so that he could do his cancer treatment as well. And so they were both in Atlanta, staying with Barry's daughter and husband and granddaughter. And what was interesting in the book is Barry's little granddaughter had a pit bull dog called Langston. And what was interesting is Barry, moved into the guest room in her daughter's house, and the pit bull, Langston was his name, sensed that there was something wrong with Barry, and would lay down at her feet, and was constantly by her side. And the whole time Barry was there in the house with this life-threatening illness, this dog, Langston, this pit bull dog, would constantly be with her. And when she went to sleep at night, the dog would be at the door, and he would sleep there the whole night, until morning, until it was safe. So this dog became a guardian to her, and she mentioned it in the book. So it's not just the caregivers that are people that are important to your recovery if you're dealing with a life-threatening illness. It's also animals, and these other little acts of kindness make such a big difference. And I really wanted to ask Barry about that because you never know what to say to people who are in this situation. You would never know what to say to someone who had just been diagnosed with cancer, was going through cancer treatment, and dealing with their spouse at the same time, and both in the same hospital. It's just no one could even fathom. Which is why the book is so compelling. Again, it's Stronger with Two is the name of the book that we're talking about tonight. The author is Barry Ross, now a wonderful and compassionate patient advocate for other people that are sick with cancer and helping them. Anyway, so Barry gets to Atlanta, and her daughters kick in, and they find out that in her own cancer treatment, she has got to have radiation to kill the tumor, and she has got to have chemotherapy to also deal with the cancer. So it's a two-prong strategy to bring her to wellness. And her daughters kick into high gear. They call it Operation Get Mommy Well. And they put together a schedule, 7-week schedule for the treatment, and they find caregivers to help drive uh, Barry to the hospital, to help her get medications, to help her with everything that she needed. And they put together this schedule, and so it's people flying in from other parts of the country to take a shift to be a caregiver and make sure that she goes to the treatments and deal with her, because it's she mentions in the book it is very, very stressful to be a caregiver. And I this probably would have been a great question to ask her is, do you recommend that the caregiving be broken up between people? And that's what they did in their family. They broke it up between other family members, and they also had a fantastic church there in Atlanta that helped. So the pastor of their church asked for volunteers to come and help both Charles and Barry, and they would come and take them to appointments. They would um, give a meal, and there are so many things that we can do for people who are in a terminal illness that aren't, you know, that may seem insignificant, but actually mean a lot. Like just bringing over some food, bringing over some, even just buying flowers. Barry said there were so many people who stepped up and did things for her that meant a lot, especially as she was going through the chemotherapy and the radiation. The radiation part was terrible. They had what they did. So they had to. She couldn't move when she was getting the radiation. It was imperative that she had to be perfectly still. And so they made a cast of her head so that she could, be perfectly still while they were applying the radiation. And in the beginning, I suppose it's just like any kind of treatment. She kind of thought, "Oh, this is no big deal." And but then it started getting worse and worse, and we're all that way. I can remember my younger sister was having a baby, and she had called, and she was like, a few hours into the whole thing, she's like, "Oh, this is easy. This is nothing. This is going to be a breeze." And then 36 hours later, she called me and she said, "I will never, never have another baby." But anyway, um, so at first the treatment was mild, and then all of a sudden, it really became uncomfortable for Barry, and she started becoming very violently ill from the radiation. She couldn't keep any food down. But before she had started the treatment, the radiation and the chemotherapy, they had put a feeding port into her, like a feeding tube, so that they could feed her, because they knew when they started the radiation, she would not be able to eat normal food. So they trained them how to do this feeding machine. They would, put syringes of different canned supplements in so that she could be nourished while she was doing the chemotherapy, because it really made her really sick. And so the radiation people in Winship were very, very kind to Barry, and really rooting for her. Especially when they found out not only was she sick, but her husband was sick too. They were like, they became kind of one of their favorite patients there in the hospital. So, uh, uh, and maybe there are people, in YouTube or Facebook who have had to go through this sort of experience. They gave Barry a ton of green colored vomit bags, and it got to the point where uh, she didn't care about her clothes or her purse or her keys. All she cared about was her vomit bags. Always having a vomit bag with her, which just sounds terrible in itself. But she had to do, so she was doing back to back appointments. She would do the radiation, and then she would go in and do the chemotherapy. And the chemotherapy, it is terrible in itself. You sit in a room, you have a great big bag of the drugs, and they put it through you, and it takes a couple of hours to get through, but it just wreaks havoc. And the radiation did cause Barry to lose her hair, and it was unfortunate. But one of her daughter's friends, um, wanted to do something useful for Barry when she heard that both Barry and her husband Charles were sick. They wanted to do something. She wanted to do something useful, so she went shopping, and she found uh, uh, dozens and dozens of beautiful scarves, beautiful headscarves, and she wrapped them up and gave them to Barry, knowing that she had this terrible tumor that was growing on the back of her neck, and she also didn't have any hair. So she gave her the scarves so that she could kind of be wrap them around herself and be kind of incognito out in public. And it was such a warm gesture that Barry thought it was an angelic move. And there's probably a lot of people who have been in the same boat dealing with life-threatening illness, and there's been someone that has come along and given them a beautiful gift like that has meant the world to them. And I wanted to ask about that, and maybe people can comment in YouTube's, but if you're that sick, what is the one thing you hate people to ask about? I mean, there must be something that is, that you just don't want to hear. And as Barry's treatment went on, uh, further and further, it started to take its toll on her body. One thing that happened is her swallowing. She couldn't swallow anymore because her muscles in her throat had atrophied a bit. And it was her. She had looked at her tongue in the mirror at one point, and it was just black because of the radiation, because there was so much coming through there to kill the cancer. Mm. And uh and it was very, very painful. So it got to the point where she was in distress because of the pain. She could think of nothing else, and she went to the captain of her um, uh, oncology team, and said, I can't do this. This is just too much pain." And so they had to admit her to the hospital. And they actually have pain specialists that help with managing pain and helping people who are in duress really deal with the onslaught of pain and monitoring it so that they don't become addicted to this pain, to the pain medication that they have to give you. So to keep your body in check and keep you from checking out, really. So they finished the radiation on um, Bari's neck, and her throat is just ruined. It's just taken a huge toll on her. And she says in the book, "I felt as though my words were useless. No one could understand what I was feeling since it hurt so much to talk. I wouldn't even bother talking to people." She was in that kind of extreme, and and it was just such a terrible, terrible ordeal. So she's doing that, and not only was she doing that, her husband was also going through his own hell, and he eventually started helping her as she was struggling with radiation and chemotherapy, having just done it himself. And uh, she ends up becoming cancer free, as does her husband Charles. After all of this terrible, terrible mess, they were old enough. They were lucky because they were old enough that they were able to apply for Social Security disability so that they could collect, Social Security, uh, because they had to give up their restaurant. They had to let all their employees go. They had to basically leave in such a hurry. They left their apartment, basically, had to abandon it. They had, people and friends come in and box up some of their belongings, and it was such a terrible time. They didn't like Barry didn't feel like whether or not she was going to live, or and so she just told her friends in Phoenix that were packing up this stuff, do whatever you want. If there's anything that you want to keep, just go ahead and keep it. And one of their friends in Phoenix took a lot of their belongings and took the time to carefully look at it and see if it was something that might mean something to them, and just very carefully packed up all of the things they thought were meaningful into boxes. And this friend of Barry's stored boxes and boxes and boxes of their things, their belongings, for years in her own living room. And, she was talking about angels and how people do these angelic acts. And maybe this friend didn't have the opportunity to, take Barry to a chemo session, or maybe she didn't have the opportunity to be in the hospital with her, but still she was able to do something huge for her in the end by just simply boxing stuff up and keeping it. And they were so touched by her care and by her willingness to help out in such a extreme way. So even though we can't maybe be a there in the thick of the care, we can certainly be helpful in other ways. Um, and Barry even says that in the book. She says sometimes caregiving requires skills other than feeding and tender care. Sometimes it needs a strong voice and a determined heart. And that is true. And she was lucky enough to have a friend that was that way. But you know what? Something really happened to uh, Barry that I want to mention. Barry had finished all of her treatment, and she had had surgery on her neck to remove lymph nodes. And they had, completed the surgery, and she had gone home, and she was with Charles, her husband. And all of a sudden, she started feeling really sick. She was running a really high temperature, and she woke Charles up, her husband, and she said, "We've got to go to the hospital. You've got to take me to the emergency room. Something's wrong. I don't feel good. I don't feel right." And Charles took her to the emergency room, and she was examined by the interns, like the resident interns. And they're like, "Well, we don't find anything wrong with you. We think you're fine. We're just going to send you home." And she's like, "No, I feel like there's something wrong." And and they were like, "Well, Miss Ross, we have tested you and we can't find anything wrong. Why don't you go home and get some sleep, and just give us a call if anything changes?" And she's like, "I want a real," she said, I don't know if she said it this way, "I want a real doctor to look at me because there is something wrong." And they called the captain. You remember the captain that was in charge of her cancer treatment? He came and he looked at her, and he was almost inclined to agree with the residents, but he trusted uh, Barry enough to think, "Okay, we'll admit you for observation." And good thing they did, because it turns out she had an infection. She had a staph infection developing in her neck, and they were. Through the night, they were able to find it and fix it. And I know that if Bari had come on the show, she would have been able to make it. And I'm worried about her, because I hope everything is fine with her and her husband and her patients that she cares for, because she may have had to have had an emergency and uh, couldn't have gotten a hold of us. And if she sees this later, and that was the case, then no, I'm still grateful that I got to read the book. But that's one thing she would say to you is, trust your own self, trust what's going on in your own body, because doctors can't feel what you're feeling. And tell your doctor everything. Tell your doctor everything that you're feeling. Don't be embarrassed about any sort of pain that you might be experiencing or any symptoms. Tell your doctor everything. Let him know, "Oh, I've got a pain here. This doesn't feel right. I'm achy. I am chilled." Tell your doctor everything, because she would not say no. She told her doctor, "This is what I feel. This is what I'm feeling." And it really probably saved her life. She would not go home. And she trusted herself and her body enough to uh, make that decision for herself and be her own advocate. Basically, from the beginning, the beginning of her journey, Barry, had to take things in her own hands, because her doctor in Phoenix wasn't saying anything. "Well, how does that help Barry?" Well, here's a plan on how we're going to cure you. It was just a bunch of talk of insurance, like, "Oh, your insurance doesn't do this, your insurance doesn't do that." And what she really needed to know is, how are we going to fix this? How are we going to make me better? Because all you're doing is talking insurance and I don't hear. Um, I'm going to save you, or I'm going to help you. And anyway, the book is amazing, and it is quite a journey as you go through it. Uh, y- when you read it, and you can find it on Amazon, you can find it in the Kindle version on Amazon, which is what I did. You can find it, and definitely it is a page turner. And by the end of that book, you will be cheering, especially when it gets to a year that her and Charles have been cancer free. Now they both had a little bit of a scare, though, thinking that maybe that cancer was coming back, but it was like Barry had a little bit of a scare with breast cancer, but it turned out just to be something benign. But she was really having a a great deal of stress about it. And who wouldn't after being through this agony and torture that she went through from all through 2009 and a little bit into 2010? And oh my gosh, it's just anyway. So her and Charles eventually started becoming involved in survivors groups, and talking to other survivors. Charles, even the husband who survived a rare leukemia, he started doing 5K runs with his oncologist, with his doctor. And he won, like, he did really good. Like, he came in, like, 1st and 2nd place in these races. For a man that was, like, near on, death's door, that was an amazing thing, for him to accomplish after, having overcome cancer. And he was and there were so many people that had been with those 2 as they were going through this journey that anytime they saw them in the, oncology, they would be like, "Is everything okay?" "Are you okay?" And it was, they had so many people rally around them, which was another really important part of the book, because sometimes there are people who have no one to go through this with, that are on their own, either a lack of family or a lack of resources. And it's really important, if you're going through this, to reach out some way, or to reach out to those that are in a situation where they are dealing with um, a terminal illness. And there are a lot of advocates out there that are, just like Barry, that know the medical system, that know what you need to ask, that know questions that you need to be asking your medical professionals. And it's important to seek them out, because, like Barry said, it's not just doctors that are going to help you. It's not just the medicine that's going to help you. It's the caregivers around you that also are going to help you recover, not only from terminal illness, but from illness in general. It's good to have that kind of support structure in your life. Maybe it's you're a good friend if you don't have any family in the area, but it's something to be mindful of, um, to have those resources when you need them in a time in your life when you might be on your own, and to kind of think about those things, because it is important. Sometimes you can't uh, get to where you need to go. There's a funny comedian who also went through a bout with cancer, and I'll mention this up as we're closing. Tig Notaro also uh, dealt with breast cancer, and she did it in a funny way. You can look for her story. Her album is out there on iTunes. But anyway, I want to thank you for being along on this journey on the New Bridge Radio Show. It was kind of a weird, an unusual show. There were technical problems, and I do hope that Bari Ross is fine, and her husband as well, and that they're just had a bit of a technical issue, or maybe they had an emergency they had to attend. But the book is fantastic. It's Stronger with Two. Look for it in on Amazon or where fine books are sold. And that's going to do it for us on the New Bridge Radio Show. Stay tuned for Haunted Voices with Todd Bates, and we'll see you next week on the New Bridge Radio Show.